everyone, Jess with Emotional Fire Academy, here to talk today about why am I so sensitive and cry easily over everything. Subscribe to my channel. I create new videos every week about what it's like to be a highly sensitive person. And who am I? I am Jess. I am your driver operator on this journey today into sensitivity. I'm an emotion coach and a former firefighter. So this is a very loaded question. And I first want to point out that inherent in the question is a judgment, right? Essentially you're asking, why am I so messed up? What is wrong with me? Why do I cry so much? Crying is bad, right? All of that is kind of inherent in this question. So let's start there really quick. By whose measure are you crying too easily? All right, is it society? Is it somebody else close to you that said, oh, you cry too easily? Let's deeper explore this, shall we? Because maybe the stuff that you're crying about needs to be cried about. Maybe it is really sad. Who gets to decide? If it's not you, who gets to decide whether you cry too much or you're too sensitive? Whose judgment is that? And I guess if you're looking at social norms, you have to remember that the world is not set up currently to support highly sensitive people. Now, this makes sense with the snail's pace of civil rights, right? Unfortunately, minorities, people of color, women, anyone, LGBTQ, anyone in a minority has been fighting for their rights for a very long time, and there have been a lot of setbacks. Obviously, if we look at the world as it is right now, it's a constant struggle sometimes to bring the social norms up to where they should be. And so, as highly sensitive people, we are the emotional minority, right? And so we have to kind of take that into account. And so, allowing society to judge us as being too sensitive is really kind of an erroneous thought. So these are just some ideas I'm throwing out for you. Drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think below, because, it doesn't really matter what society thinks, right? Because if it's behind, let's assume it's behind. So if we are kind of ahead of the curve, we're highly sensitive people, we feel things, we cry easily, so what? Like, we're the trendsetters, we're ahead of the curve, we're living in a world that hasn't come around to appreciating us yet, but will one day. I know, because emotion is information. In the animal world, emotion is taken seriously in a herd or a group situation. Between animals, it's taken seriously. And so I think sometimes forgetting that we are part of that bigger natural collective and not taking it seriously is kind of to our detriment. But anyway, I'm just throwing this stuff out there. I want you to start thinking about it and tossing it around and see that in that question, by whose measure? And does that person matter? Does it matter what the world thinks? Does it really matter? Because we equally could have been living in a world right now that does appreciate emotion, and that crying was valued as a source of information that something was wrong and needed to be fixed. And if more people cried about more issues, they might change faster. So, something else to consider. The simple answer to this question, because, right, truth is always relative. There's many layers to truth. The simple answer to why we would be sensitive and cry easily is that it's our go-to emotion. We often practice a go-to emotion. For me, it's anger and sadness. Other people, it's shame, fear. It's just the emotional response that we practice most readily. And so in practicing that, we condition ourselves to do it easily, more quickly. And so if you find yourself crying more easily, maybe it's just because that's the emotion that you practice the most and the one that comes up, right? When something is triggered and you have a feeling, that is automatically sadness, and crying is kind of the one that you go to. And so that is the simple answer, but let's dive into the complicated answer. I can't wait to talk about this. I've been thinking about this all morning. So let's define sensitivity. Sensitivity, the dictionary definition, is quick to respond to slight changes, signals, or influence. Let's say it again. Quick to respond to slight changes, signals, or influences. So being quick to respond. All right, I take you back to the emotional fire triangle because it is the basis of my coaching practice. It is what I believe it's based in neurolinguistic programming. I'm so excited I can't get my words out. But essentially says that our physiology, our conditioning, and our language come together to create emotion in the middle. So when we have combinations of those three, we have the fire of emotion kind of uprising in the middle. So let's look at sensitivity from each of the angles of the fire triangle and talk about how they differ, because there are subtle differences, and those subtle differences can translate into huge, they can be big on the other, can be small at the origin, but then balloon into something much larger on a meaning and a philosophical scale. So, all right. So sensitivity in our physiology. I want to start there because this is where I think the highly sensitive person comes about. And I urge you to check out my Am I a Highly Sensitive Person video. I'll put the link above right now. But being a highly sensitive person really has a lot to do with body, with your physiology, with your input. There is a genetic component to being a highly sensitive person. I think for me, and this is my interpretation of it, it's a genetic predisposition to perceiving more of the world through your senses. So if you're a highly sensitive person, you're just noticing more through your skin, your eyes, your taste buds, your sense of smell, your hearing. You're just getting more data. It's a matter of more data. The other 80% of the population who don't identify as highly sensitive did not have this genetic predisposition. And that doesn't mean it can't be turned on, because I do think genes can be turned on and off with certain environmental influences. However, if you were born a highly sensitive person, you had that disposition, you perceived more of the world and you reacted to it, that's the essence of being a highly sensitive person. So what does sensitivity in your physiology look like? It is more sensory input. It's literally more data. The other 80% of people who aren't highly sensitive, let me finish that thought, just don't get as much data. Like that is literally the difference. And so the predictive nature of life, right? We base our experience on our predictions of what life is going to be like based on our past experiences. And so we spend a lot of time in our heads. Very little of our actual sensory input gets to our brain. But the difference is quite large for someone who does get, that extra 2 or 3% or whatever it is more. That translates to a lot of data because we're processing millions of bits of data just in everything that's going around us, or that we're seeing, smelling, hearing, even if we're not conscious of it happening. So that adds a lot more data that needs to be sifted, sorted, interpreted for meaning, and thus can cause overwhelm. So noticing those subtleties in your senses, your sensory input, is how sensitivity and physiology manifests, right? And so your equipment, your body, your equipment is just more sensitive. It is more reactive to slight changes, signals, or influences in the outside world. That's the nature of being a highly sensitive person. So to answer the question from that vantage point, from this side of the triangle, so why am I so sensitive and I cry easily over everything? If you're a highly sensitive person, then you're crying because that's a safe way for you to release. It's like a pressure release valve, right? You've gotten all this data, and then suddenly it's just erupts back out of you, right? Energy needs somewhere to go. If you're absorbing and processing, sometimes it needs to come out. Sometimes it needs that pressure release valve. And the tears just seem to be automatic sometimes. So to answer that question, if you're a highly sensitive person, it might just be a way to release. And we often feel better. I feel better after a good ugly cry. I feel so much better. And so it's working. So it does solve a problem. It solves the goal, right? Crying fixes the problem. So it's adaptive. So, okay, there's no judgment in that. Like, it's okay, you know? And crying really is a socially acceptable way to have that release, right? If it was socially acceptable to just like scream at the top of our lungs wherever we were when we reached to that point instead, we might do that. But it's not, that draws a lot of attention to us and kind of makes the problem worse. Crying, at least we can, wipe our eyes, we can go to the bathroom and do it in peace and quiet. It's a little more, unfortunately, the way that our Western society is, it's a little more socially acceptable, even though it kind of isn't. Most people look down on it, but still, it's a way to release that is safer than maybe other, screaming at the top of your lungs or, another energetic release. All right, let's answer the question, moving on from, let's move to our conditioning. So, a lot of people might not make a discernment between someone who's highly sensitive and someone who's insecure. And often the two do go hand in hand. I think if you're highly sensitive, born with that genetic predisposition, it often sets you up for starting to feel insecure in life because you get the messaging often, growing up from family members, from other children, from teachers, adults, that you're different. Something is different. Something is wrong with you. Something, you shouldn't react. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't cry. You shouldn't get angry. And so this does set us up for being insecure. There's a subtle difference in not all insecure people are HSPs. Sometimes there are just insecure people. And I use this word because I like it, because it's the most identifiable. So sensitivity in your conditioning, it looks like insecurity. And what is your conditioning? Essentially, it's your collection of habits and patterns that were reinforced by either you, someone else, or by social norms, your perception of social norms. So these are your beliefs, your conclusions, your deductions of the world that you've just kept amassing and accumulating and reinforced through seeing them be true, collecting the truth. That's your conditioning. So insecurity. So I think we can all think of someone who is insecure, who is trigger happy, who just, when we say the wrong thing to them, they almost kind of disappear. They disappear into their own mind, or they have this reaction that doesn't seem appropriate to what we might have said. And we might not have even intended it to be malicious, but they take it the wrong way because they have these triggers that are very fresh. This type of sensitivity, so, it looks, again, it's being trigger happy, someone who's insecure. It's kind of unresolved wounds or destructive or unhealthy beliefs or habits. That is what sensitivity looks like in your conditioning. And in order to try and protect those wounds, right, if these wounds are really painful, they cause us physical and emotional pain, we're going to be vigilant. We're going to be vigilant to protect that wound, to scan our environment for any threat that's going to poke that wound in us and hurt us. And so that constant vigilance changes our filters. And they have done research on this where, because we're like, what we fear, they say what you fear manifests, because you're looking for evidence of your fear out there, and you typically find it. And what you're afraid of then manifests, and you experience it. And so these things that we are trying to protect ourselves against, we will actually often find in the smallest, most innocuous places, because we're so hypervigilant about protecting ourselves about it, right? And so if you are sensitive in this way, and I understand we're all human, I'm not judging this, I admit that insecurity was one of the problems I really struggled with as a highly sensitive person. I was insecure about being highly sensitive, and I think that happens a lot for a lot of highly sensitive people. just because it's not the social norm. It's not acceptable. It's hard for other people to deal with the emotional inconsistency. I just want to caveat that. So, to answer the question from the sensitivity of insecurity. So, why am I so sensitive and cry easily over everything? Maybe you cry because you need to heal something and it is triggered easily and frequently. And this is true for someone who is insecure, who might not be HSP. It's true for someone who is HSP and insecure about something, or for someone that just has a wound, a really deep wounding that hasn't been felt and addressed and needs to happen. And so that is why you would cry easily over something, because it's still raw, it still hurts. There's a wound in there that needs to be healed. And finally, the last side is language. Language, obviously, is a way that we communicate with each other. We pass information between each other, between organizations and individuals, between individuals and organizations, even within ourselves. Thoughts are a type of language, right? It's just the language that comes into our minds and that we then interpret or act upon. So the sensitivity on the language side of the triangle, I'm going to call suggestibility. Suggestibility is your willingness to take on someone else's opinion, or let that opinion change you, or let an outside opinion change you, right? That's a rough definition of suggestibility. And because of this, credibility really has to do a lot with sensitivity on the language side. So how credible is the source? This is the difference between, when you're judging someone's rank or status in your life, the situation that they're in, that's when you're judging, okay, how much did this person mean that? And so if you're highly suggestible, things that might bother you are, someone you don't even know saying something to you that is really hurtful. You literally take that in, you take that thought in, and you start to believe it. You start to believe that it's true. Whereas, in other situations, we can judge the credibility of, someone who is, let's say someone who's drunk on the street saying, I love you so much. And our special someone saying, I love you so much. Right? The situation comes into context. Which one are we more likely to believe? Which one they're both kind of the same words. They both might be the same tonality, right? There's a lot of information in the tone. But the credibility comes into question. And so how suggestible you are to what other people say, because really words are just information. We don't have to accept what it is. We don't have to accept that information. We can reject it or just ignore it. Or we can act upon it and start to believe it and then change our filters to reinforce that belief and then really, push it into the realm of conditioning. And I did want to point out that, there's a lot of overlap on the corners. On the edges, these sides of the triangle, they interact with each other. So sensitivity in the language side of the triangle is your willingness to believe the info in the language. And this is hardest in your own head. So let's think about our thoughts. No one really knows where thought comes from. Let's be totally honest. From a scientific standpoint, scientists don't really know right now where thought comes from. Most of us assume, thought is in my own head, thus it is mine. Is that a correct assumption? What if we found out tomorrow that thought is actually a cloud? There's a cloud of thoughts, and we're like radios, and we literally just pick up on thoughts that are random and not ours. That could be equally possible. We don't know. We have no science to prove it. What if thoughts are totally random? What if there is no process behind it? What if they are completely random? They're just tiny bits of information that came from everywhere and nowhere and just strewn together, and they pass through our mind, and then we somehow believe them. Would it be healthy to believe something that's totally random and has no basis in reality, it's just completely random. It's like forgetting who you are and walking down the street and seeing a tree and thinking, I am a tree, and standing there for 10 years. And then seeing a car drive by and then I am a car. And like, it's kind of the same concept, right? And this is hard in our head. We don't know where our thoughts come from. So assuming that they're credible might lead us down a dangerous path. Where do these thoughts come from? Are they from us? Are they from other people? Are they from, what somebody said to us 10 years ago and we're suddenly, we were suddenly reminded of it and we don't really know where it comes from. So giving it credibility can be problematic. We think about 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. And what power we have with our thoughts is in what we choose to believe, right? What we condition, we select that information that we select from the thought, choose to believe, and then start to reinforce and become part of our conditioning. And so, to answer the question from the language element, why am I so sensitive and cry easily over everything? You cry because you are believing an unpleasant thought as true. You've taken a thought, you have believed it to be your own, to be yours, and that it's true because it's in your head. But thoughts are just thoughts, unless we give them power. Thoughts are just thoughts. They fall through our mind like leaves off of a tree. And we don't have to grab them and eat them. We don't have to grab them and consume them and make them ours and take them in as part of who we are. So start watching your thoughts, and don't make them a part of you unless they're unpleasant. So when you'll realize if you're crying easily because of the thoughts you're having, when you stop choosing the thought, you can just watch the thought, let it cross your mind, and then think about something else. And the tears will end. So I hope this was very informative. It was fun to talk about this with you. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you thought of this video, and if you agree with the 3 elements of sensitivity, where they come from, and why you are so sensitive, and what area of the triangle you think you're residing in. I would love to hear it. And if you are a highly sensitive person ready to have your sensitivity work for you and not against you, I urge you to reach out for a free 30-minute consultation with me. I will give you some excellent ideas and help you brainstorm and get to that place. I also have a 3-month journey program, flammable to fireproof. It helps highly sensitive people evolve to the next level and become highly sensitive hotshots. So thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.